Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen. Many Canadians are hanging on by a thread today. Inflation has now reached a 30-year high, 6.7%. House prices have doubled in 7 years, up 100% since Justin Trudeau took office, 50% just in the last 2 years alone. This is the result of government money printing that has sent more dollars chasing fewer goods, driving higher prices. Justin Trudeau has doubled the debt in just the last 7 years. He has done that by requiring the central bank print more money to pay for his spending. More money chasing fewer goods always equals higher prices. So inflationary deficits send more money chasing fewer goods, driving higher prices. Inflationary taxes make it more expensive for businesses to produce those goods and services. The result is people feel like they're losing control of their lives. Maybe it's the single mother who's skipping meals so that her kids don't have to because she's part of the 4 in 5 Canadian families that have had to cut back on their diet because of food inflation. Maybe it's the working guy who can't afford to drive to work because it's $2 a liter for gas. Or maybe it's the 32-year-old woman living in her mother's basement because she can't afford $874,000 for the average house today. That is Justinflation. But it is the result of very deliberate policies that have driven up the cost of living, inflated the wealth of the rich, and the cost of living of everybody else. Worse yet, we lack accountability. Here in Canada, there is no independent audit appointed to oversee the $400 billion of transactions that the Bank of Canada has carried out to finance Justin Trudeau's spending. Right now, the finance minister gets to handpick the auditor, rather than, as is the case in New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom, having an independent audit of the central bank. And so I have with me here today Mr. Andrew Scheer, who has proposed a law to bring us in line with other Commonwealth countries, to give Canadians the accountability over their money that they deserve, and to ensure that this kind of disastrous inflationary policy never happens again. As Andrew correctly pointed out, Justin Trudeau has threatened the independence of the Bank of Canada by forcing it to print $400 billion of new money, causing today's 30-year highs in inflation, doubling housing prices, attacking the poor, and helping the rich. And that is why I am announcing today that a Poilievre government will amend the law to allow the Auditor General to probe and investigate the financial transactions of the Bank of Canada. Furthermore, I will put forward a motion in Parliament to have the Auditor General carry out a full investigation into the $400 billion of inflationary money printing that the government has done since 2020 that has caused the inflation crisis we have today. Beyond that, the government, now that they've failed to do their singular job of keeping inflation low, they propose to give themselves even more power. The central bank is now promoting a possible proposal to bring in a digital currency controlled by the government. Now, let's start off by asking what's new. We all know that Canadians have digital money already. It's called a bank account. We have debit cards, credit cards, PayPal, email transfers, and plenty of other ways that people can transact the Canadian dollar digitally without the Bank of Canada controlling it. So what's the difference that this new digital currency by the central bank would bring? The answer, of course, is that it would be deposited in a government bank account. A central bank digital currency would mean that Canadians would have their money deposited with the government rather than with a private financial institution, and that the central bank would then be in direct competition with commercial banks. Of course, this would bring no new benefit to consumers. We already have all of the technological benefits of electronic transfers of cash today. but it would bring plenty of new risks. By the admission of the central bank itself in one of its policy papers on the subject, this policy could lead to a bank run. A bank run is when people move their money out of an individual bank en masse, destabilizing that bank and causing financial panic. And that could happen if people were incentivized to move their money into a government bank account because of promises of state-subsidized interest payments or other artificial advantages. Furthermore, the government controls your bank account. It can surveil what you're doing, what you're spending, and potentially abuse your civil liberties. And we saw this just several months ago when the Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act and in order to freeze the bank accounts of his political opponents. Imagine the extra power that he would have over people's financial lives if their deposits were in the possession of the central bank. Furthermore, the central bank would have an unfair competitive position because it can artificially create cash out of thin air, something that commercial banks could not match. That means that it could effectively force Canadians to move their money over in order to get state-subsidized interest payments, all of which would lead to far more inflation. We've seen what happens when government has too much control of our money. Runaway inflation. We're paying for it today. The last thing we need is to give government and politicians more control of our money after they have failed so disastrously over the last 7 years. So, a Poilievre government will ban a central bank digital currency and allow Canadians to have the economic and financial liberty that they deserve. I'm running for Prime Minister to give Canadians back control of their lives by making Canada the freest nation on earth. That means tackling inflation, making life affordable, protecting the purchasing power of your paycheck and your money. It also means taking control of money away from bankers and politicians and giving it back to the people. And that is exactly what a Poilievre government will do. Thank you very much.